Today, here in the garden of Confessor's Gate, we've been digging deeper just to make sure we haven't missed any evidence relating to the medieval chapel we found next door. Well, yesterday I was giving your wife a really hard time because it seemed that your garden wasn't riddled with history in the way that you both hoped it would be. But this morning we had a reassessment. We realised that actually we hadn't gone down as far in these trenches as we needed to go. So Matt spent virtually the whole day re-excavating these trenches, and the news is I was right, there is no history in your garden.
There's nothing here at all.
Nothing here at all. As you can see, look at that.
It's a lovely hole.
Great big hole. Yes.
But the good news is that it looks as though next door we've got the chapel. So the value of their house is going to rocket now.
Thrilled for them.
We'll sell them the name.
As ever, back garden archaeology is a tricky business, and there's no predicting how it will turn out. Raksha, how's our chapel getting on?
It's not really a chapel anymore.
You're kidding.
No, it's a more humble building. It's a privy.
You're joking.
No.
So you've got a cesspit, in fact?
Yes.
Why? How do you know?
Found lots of degraded faeces, I'm afraid. There you go.
Colour of it down there.
And what's this thing here?
It's a nice kind of cauldron vessel, cooking pot that we found.
And you found it down the toilet?
Yes.
I can't imagine what it was doing down there.
What date is the cesspit?
The cesspit is about 17th century.
I can't believe it. Yesterday we were convinced we had a medieval chapel here. What happened? Raksha, as Queen of the Trenches, how could you mistake a medieval chapel for a 17th century toilet?
Well, it just shows it's an easy mistake to make.
So it's not here. What a way to end a dig. I don't think I've ever felt so disappointed. What really hacks me off is that I'd assumed that at the end of the programme I would be standing here surrounded by one of those fantastic Time Team graphics of the chapel with those great walls shooting up in the air and that huge roof and those very interesting windows, and instead I guess you'll have to make do with a drawing of some old bloke sitting on a 17th century loo. But it's not all bad news, because what we can show them is the impressive remains of the moated medieval manor house that once occupied this field. Built around 1320 by Abbot Kirtlington of Westminster Abbey, this would have been a collection of separate stone buildings set around a great hall. And with its newly channelled water supply, fish ponds and extensive grounds, this was a manor house literally fit for royalty to visit. And yet, it had been largely forgotten until now.
Brace yourself for treasure. Ta-da!
Even I, as a Romanist, would recognise that as
Yep.
a significant object.
Absolutely. It may not be
Saxon
beautiful.
tin head.
Yep, Middle Anglo-Saxon, 8th, 9th century. So
Yeah.
it fits in brilliantly with the shatter
Doesn't it?
and with the pottery that seems to be coming out of
Yeah.
the ditch, which is really tremendous. It's really
That's
exciting.
superb.
I mean, I know it's building castles in the air, but an Anglo-Saxon ditch, a Middle Anglo-Saxon ditch round an island,
Yeah.
it's beginning to look like, oh, could be a monastery.
There are now all sorts of theories running around the site that we may have discovered a significant centre of Anglo-Saxon religion.
Oh my goodness, what's that? What is that?
It's another wall, and it's butting against the wall of the kiln. Somebody's built a wall into the kiln.
My goodness.
And that wall was cut by the graves.
Oh gosh, that's an awful lot of strange happenings all at once.
Yep. They've created an apse, they've taken a circular structure and they've created an apsidal thing.
The thing that I immediately think of with an apsidal building is, at what date do they do this? Burials, apses, you know, it's all sounding awfully church-like.
Now, suggesting a bit of reused kiln is possibly part of an early church seems a theory too far to me. And in fact it probably is, but for the archaeologists, this isn't some bizarre leap of faith. We could be on the verge of discovering something really special.
I think this kiln is
disused, stable, overgrown before these post holes are being put in. So post-Roman, and apart from Roman finds, the most common find on this site has been Middle Anglo-Saxon. So I would like them to be Middle Anglo-Saxon. And in fact, Ben and I have been hypothetically building religious houses out of them for a while.
Yes.
What do you think? Two different periods on one side.
Yeah, well, they're definitely post-Roman, like you say. The finds, the skellies, the ditch. You know, some sort of Middle Saxon community on this hilltop, and the local parallels for that are hermitages.
Is that just like a little hut where a hermit lives?
Yeah, kind of, a little sort of community. The interesting thing is we don't actually know what the sites look like because all the other sites grew into fantastic abbeys. So Crowland, Ely, Thorney, they all start off as hermitages and grow into big abbeys, so we just don't see the early stuff.
The only problem with the theory is that hermits demand isolation, and our work here has shown that in Roman times this hill was a busy industrial site. But the final work by Henry and Stuart shows that this landscape changed dramatically after the Romans left.
Yes, I mean, what happens in the Saxon period is that the island actually acts as a bit of a dam for all the sediment that's being washed down the hill, and it all gets dropped in this area. You get alluvium. The water slows down, drops the material, it starts building up backwards, and it actually covers over the settlement, the area that Kerry was digging over here. That's why you got that high depth of alluvium in that area. But what that does also, it sort of further isolates this island out here. It ceases to become part of the economy. There's no need for a settlement, as it were, out on this remote little island.
Oh, except by certain people.
Yeah, except by, you've got it.
Yes,
it
yes.
becomes an ideal location for a little
Absolutely.
monastic hermitage.
Absolutely.
It's
You're
got the
singing my
isolate-
song.
yeah.
You're just like the Somerset level stuff I've been looking at, where every little island has got some crackpot old chap living on it, you know, as in retreat. or
Sounds
whatever.
ideal for you, doesn't
Sounds
it?
absolutely ideal for me.
So this was once a small, isolated religious community. In so many other places, this would have evolved into one of the great Saxon and medieval abbeys and monasteries of Britain. For some unknown reason, that didn't happen here, and as a result, we've uncovered the rarest of archaeological finds, a hermitage. And this site still offers more. As the end of the day approaches, it turns out that the Saxons and Romans weren't the first people to recognise the importance of this small Cambridgeshire hill. Been a good day for you, hasn't it? You've got your kiln and you've got an Anglo-Saxon enclosure.
Yeah.
No, it's been much better than that. It's been a fantastic lot of geophys, that has.
Yeah. Look what I've got for you. Another enclosure.
Oh my God, look at
Where,
that.
where?
Look, once you focus in on it, you can see it. If I turn it that way, it's like a pair of spectacles.
But this is a double one on this side, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's your prehistoric one.
More likely to be causewayed enclosure than before.
Why? Why do you make that assumption?
Because often there are concentric rings of these interrupted ditches, aren't there, in causewayed enclosures?
So we're suddenly back into the Neolithic again.
It could be.
We found more here at Stilton than we could ever have hoped for. In fact, the only thing we failed to find is any evidence of master Roman cheesemakers. You're going to love this because I made it. Well, it's not fair, is it? You made it, really. But it's not going to stop us having a nibble on some of that particular delicacy. It was the amazing amount of pottery in that field over there which led us to the kilns in this field here, which thankfully we found at last. But in fact, it was the discoveries on the final day that really got us excited. Not least the possible Anglo-Saxon hermitage, complete with an enclosure. In fact, this whole story has gone from the Neolithic to the Anglo-Saxon, and now in the final half hour back to the Neolithic again with John's geophys and what we think is a Neolithic enclosure. Not that we've got time to dig it, but given that Francis lives so nearby, I'm sure that at some time in the very near future he'll be back again to help us resolve this final, definitely uncheesy twist in the Stilton story. That is not my joke, that was Phil Hardy's joke. Stuart has now combined his knowledge of the Neolithic enclosures he visited with what we know about the one at Northborough.
this is the best understanding we have of the monument in its landscape at the time.
So it really is quite a lonely situation, surrounded by water channels with only a few dry land approaches to it at most times of the year.
Very much so, yeah. I mean, one of the objectives we set out from here was to try and look at this monument against the background of all these other causeway enclosures. There are 5 in this grouping, which seem quite unusual. If you look at these other enclosures, can you see up at Barham, its visibility is restricted in that direction. Can't see anything that direction at all, but you can actually see in a cone down to the river. At Uffington, it's exactly the same. See how it collects the river, as it were, in that direction, but there's no visibility that way.
So really they're all looking down onto sort of waterways, and Etna and Northborough are also in very watery situations, as we've just seen from Henry's reconstruction.
Exactly.
But do you think they're all contemporary still?
My guess is that they are. I mean, one thing that makes me think that is the commonality of shape. They've all got this very strong oval shape. And what makes it particularly interesting, that Northborough has actually got more rings than the others, and that's the furthest east along the Welland. And it just makes me wonder if that's kind of as far as they were reaching out, and this one had specific monumentality that they wanted to implant on the landscape.
Phil's perseverance has been rewarded with an important last-minute find.
Well, what have you got?
Wow, what have I got?
Gordon Bennett. Where did this come from?
Oh, that's down in the bottom of the ditch there.
This is the best bone we've had yet. Do you know what this is?
Well, no, I wouldn't ask you if I did.
No, you wouldn't. This is an aurochs.
What?
Wild cattle. It's the only one we've seen so far. This is incredible. This is a distal fit. It goes right there in me, and it's about 4 times as big. This has never been domesticated. This is a wild animal through and through.
How frequently do they turn up on causeway enclosures?
Not very often, let's put it that way. It's a nice thing to find. It's very special.
Well, you see, you know, you're kind of saying how important it is. The place where we found it is special.
Why is that?
Because it's right at the bottom of the ditch. It's right in the middle between the 2 ends.
This did not happen by accident. This has been put here quite deliberately.
It does seem just too much
It's too much of a coincidence.
That is
too much of a coincidence.
I'd better go and find some more.
Made my day.
Aurochs were hunted in the Neolithic period, but must have been quite a challenge to kill. They were formidable beasts, built like a Spanish fighting bull, but twice the size. At the start of our dig of the causewayed enclosure at Northborough, we had 2 opposing views about what Neolithic people did here. Francis argued it was a place for rituals revering the ancestors and gods, while Ben thought it was where Britain's first farmers gathered in their resources. So after all this archaeology, are you still convinced that essentially this is a big farm?
Well, look, we've got enhanced magnetism in the ditches here. This is burning. This is debris and charcoal from settlement being dumped into the top of ditches. On the interior of the enclosure, again, the anomaly is raised by the burning here, so it comes out as yellow. The phosphates, too, show that we've got animals being driven into the enclosure, pulled outside and then driven in. So, you know, I think it's pretty compelling.
Compelling?
Superficially, yes. But the burning on the interior would fit beautifully with people using this seasonally, clearing off the vegetation and then getting on with their religious, activities.
It does stretch credibility somewhat, doesn't it, to think that this huge earth monument with these massive ditches around it was built simply to be a farm.
Well, not a farm, but a place where resources are pulled into. They dominated a wide area of this landscape. They are farming it, and they're bringing the resources back here. I just don't think you let your cows into church, do you? And you don't let them poo in church when they're there.
That's a point, isn't it? Aren't you simply importing a theory which works well in other sites where they have found ritual deposits and sticking it here where they haven't found any?
Well, I'd contest the fact they haven't found any. We've got that half-fired pot, which doesn't make any sense, full of charred grain right in the bottom of the ditch, and that aurochs bone, which is placed absolutely on the bottom of the ditch, right in the middle. And that thing is a deliberate placement.
So are you prepared to concede that there might be a ritual element here?
Well, look, I think in everyday life, there's an element of ritual that creeps in, and I think we can pick that up through archaeology. So I'm prepared to concede that they were doing things that were not wholly practical all of the time.
And are you prepared to concede that there was probably some farming going on here?
Of course. And I think what really worries me, Tony,
Yeah.
I think if we continue this discussion for another 2 or 3 minutes, we might end up agreeing. So I think we should
No,
stop.
let's stop now. Cut. The causewayed enclosure at Northborough was the grandest of the group in the area. It was situated on an island surrounded by lush fenland and river channels, and seems to have been built in 2 phases. The inner ring of ditches was built first at the very start of the Neolithic age, while the smaller ditches of the outer rings were added later. The light gravelly soils of the banks would have stood out against the landscape and could have been seen from a great distance. The effect of the whole monument would have been very dramatic. No other great monuments came before it. No other man-made structures competed with it. Over the past 3 days, we've managed to tease out a picture of this part of East Anglia 6,000 years ago. If I'd approached the site then, I'd have seen massive ditches ahead of me, and I'd have crossed them along a series of causeways until I came to this huge central area. And ahead of me, I'd probably have seen a group of our Neolithic ancestors hacking away at a carcass. I'd have seen others commemorating the dead by placing bones and pottery into a shallow grave, while they waited for other local settlers with whom they could exchange grain or livestock. The fens are still farmland today, and the field boundaries stretch off into the horizon, but it was right here our ancestors put down roots and created the first farming communities.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.